Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Amelia Schlossberg, and I work at the Office of the Healthcare Advocate at Vermont Legal Aid. Thank you so much for joining us for this town hall today. This town hall will be recorded, so you can watch it afterwards. And the recording will be on our website. Our website is a joint project of Vermont Legal Aid and Legal Services Vermont. And the website is www.vtlawhelp.org. Vermont Legal Aid is a nonprofit law firm. We help people in Vermont with civil legal problems. Civil legal problems include things like housing, healthcare, disability law, elder law, and other kinds of law that are not criminal. All of our legal help is free and it's always confidential. Our website has lots of information about these legal issues, including the information that we're talking about today. So if you have a question that you don't get answered during our town hall, please feel free to check out our website. You can always call us as well if you don't find the answer on our website. And the phone number for that is 1-800-889-2047 to reach Vermont Legal Aid and Legal Services Vermont if you don't find an answer on our website. You can ask questions during this town hall. If you're joining us via Zoom, you can type your questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom screen. And if you're joining us on Facebook Live, where we are broadcasting, you can type your questions into the Facebook Live comment section. You can check a confidential anonymous box to ask an anonymous question on Zoom. You won't have that option on Facebook Live, but you can always call us and ask confidential questions that way as well. So I have a quick announcement today. Vermont Legal Aid is hosting a virtual legal advice clinic by phone. This is giving free legal help to Vermont seniors, which is age 60 and up for this one. We can answer any civil legal question. So at that virtual legal advice clinic, we can help with healthcare, Social Security, consumer debt, housing, unemployment, and more. You can call us, please call us and leave a message to book a free 20-minute appointment. This virtual legal advice clinic is on Tuesday, July 28th from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. And you can schedule your appointment by calling us at 802-318-4169 and leaving a quick voice message. So that's all the announcements for today. Today we have a town hall focused on the new rental assistance program that is helping pay Vermonters' overdue rent bills. This is a very important program, and I'm excited to welcome back our guest, Jean Murray, who joined us for a previous town hall. Jean, it looks like your video is off, so I'm going to ask you to turn your video on. There we go. Beautiful. Jean, thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm going to unmute you as well. Ask you to unmute.
Good to see you, Amelia. I'm Jean Murray. I'm a staff attorney at Vermont Legal Aid. I've been there for 22 years. Always as a part of my practice, I've done landlord-tenant law representing tenants. I'm also a renter, and I worked as part of VLA's working in collaboration with Vermont Landlords Association and Vermont State Housing Authority to describe to the legislature what this program could be and urge them to pass it so that these funds would be available to Vermonters who need them.
Great. Thank you so much for being here, Jean. So we should clarify that this webinar is for tenants or renters. We're kind of all in this pandemic together, but this webinar in particular is answering tenants' questions, renters' questions. So Jean, just quickly, when landlords have questions about this program, who are they going to be talking to?
Landlords can call the Vermont Landlords Association, and the telephone numbers there are 802-985-2764 or 888-569-7368.
Great. Thanks, Jean. Okay, so in a nutshell, what is this program, this rental housing stabilization program? What does it do?
So This program does three things. The primary thing is its goal is to prevent eviction. Most evictions in Vermont are for non-payment. With the shutdown, it is really possible that many people are having a hard time paying their rent, and therefore landlords aren't getting paid. So this is to prevent eviction by bringing tenants' past due rent accounts up and giving the money to landlords for the rent they have missed during this time.
Great, thank you. And we'll talk next week with an expert about a different program that helps people that are behind on their mortgage payments. So that's not something we're covering this week, but we'll talk about it next week. Okay, so this program helps prevent eviction, helps renters that are behind on rent. Who should apply for this program?
So if you rent your home, so you have to be a renter, and what you're renting is your home in Vermont, and you owe rent you haven't paid, and you and your landlord agree on how much rent you owe, you should apply for this program.
Great. So are there any income limits or resource limits? Do you have to prove that you're under a certain income limit or anything like that?
When you and your landlord fill out the application and send it into Vermont State Housing Authority, you're certifying that what you're saying is true. So there is that. There is no income limit either for tenants or for landlords.
Perfect. So no income limits, no resource questions. It's just if you owe overdue rent and you and the landlord agree on how much rent you owe. Can more than one person apply in the same rental apartment? Like if me and my housemates are on a lease together, can each of us apply for this?
No. So if all household members are under the same contract and the same obligation to pay rent to the same landlord, only one household member can apply and catch up with the rent owed by the whole household.
Great.
Right. There could be an exception but it's got to be rare if landlords would make separate contracts with each tenant, but generally that's not the way people do that. Amelia, you froze. Let me go on to say how you apply. You apply by looking at VermontStateHousingAuthority.org, and you look through their website. It's a two-part application. Tenants fill out the tenant application and landlords fill out the landlord application. The application is a fillable PDF, and you fill it out, you save it, and then you email it to an email address that Vermont State Housing Authority has provided. So the email address that Vermont State Housing Authority has provided is rentrelief@vsha.org, and that is for Vermont State Housing Authority to receive completed applications. It's pretty important that you save your copy so that you'll be able to see it again. When you email this and Vermont State Housing Authority receives it, you should receive a confirming email that they got it. Some people ask, because it's all done on the computer, how do I sign it? You sign this by typing in your name and sending it from your email address. On the application, one of the questions that we have come up with or has been asked of us is, on the application, I think as it is today, the tenant application could change so this word isn't on there anymore. But there's a question about, are you in an unsustainable tenancy? So in addition to this program being available to bring tenants who are staying in their same apartments rent current so they can continue to stay there, there are some tenants who find themselves in unaffordable apartments. and they have a more affordable place to go, but they can't at the moment afford security deposit, first month's rent, and whatever advance rent is required to move in. If a tenant is in an unaffordable apartment right now and has a landlord who is willing to rent a more affordable apartment to them, they can apply for security, first months, and whatever advance rent is required to move in. That's what's meant by unsustainable, is that the apartment that the tenant is currently living in, they really can't afford to live there anymore. Okay, I'm missing Amelia. So I'll just go ahead and go on and ask myself a question.
Internet went down temporarily, but they're coming back in just a moment.
Does that mean we're not?
No, I think if you can keep going on with the process of how to submit the application and any of those other logistical questions, that would be great.
Okay, so I've said that after you submit the application on the email, you should get a confirming email back from Vermont State Housing Authority that they've got it. They will match it with your landlord's application, because a tenant applying just by themselves isn't going to get a grant. The landlord has to also apply. And so Vermont State Housing Authority will match those two applications. And within 10 business days, which is often 2 weeks, they'll make a decision. They'll send out a confirming email saying, this is what we've decided to grant you. And they will direct deposit that money in the landlord's account. One of the things about this program is if you bring yourself current now, and next month you're behind again, you can apply again. The program is first come, first served till the money runs out, but there is quite a bit of money in the program. So we expect that it is going to be available to be applied for and bring tenants' rent current for many months. So if this grant is given, there are some conditions that come with the grant. And these function as protections for tenants and ways to keep the prevent eviction. So let me see. Hi, Amelia. I'm so glad you're back.
Sorry, I ran away. The internet's working back again. Tell me where
we're at?
Yeah, where we're at.
We're at what other benefits and protections are there that come along with the rent money? So
fantastic.
Bringing your rent current is a real benefit because you don't owe that rent anymore. But if the landlord agrees to accept the money, the landlord is also agreeing that any late fees that they think they're entitled to are waived. If any eviction was pending or termination notice was pending, the landlord has to agree to drop that. The landlord has to agree to not start a non-payment eviction for as many months in the future as the grant covered in the past. So for instance, if your grant covered 3 months past due rent, after the receipt of the money, the landlord has agreed to not start a non-payment eviction for 3 months after. Doesn't mean you don't owe the rent. You will owe the rent. It just gives you a buffer in terms of having to go through an eviction process. The other thing that the landlord agrees to is that if you apply and have a new application pending, as I mentioned, you could get your rent brought current, and then the next month or 2 months from now, you're behind again, you can apply again. So while one of those applications is pending, the landlord agrees to not start a new eviction. The other things are...
So that's a big benefit. You're really in preventing eviction. If there was an eviction going on, it's canceled. and you can't be evicted for as many months as the rent is covered for this program.
Another thing that happens with this program is the tenant application gives the tenant an opportunity to say, yes, I believe this is up to my repair, the status of repairs in my unit is up to the Rental Housing Health Code, or no, it's not. And if it isn't, the tenant can write down the things that they need to be repaired, and the tenant application is given to the landlord. The landlord promises to make the repairs within 30 days. A big exception to that is if the needed repairs are for life safety issues, things that are so hazardous to health and safety that the apartment is technically not habitable, the landlord won't get money until these things are fixed and verified by the town health officer or the Department of Public Safety. So it is a chance, this is a chance to let landlords know that there are repair conditions available, and landlords will promise to fix them and make sure that the apartment is up to code.
Jean, can you give an example of the difference between a regular repair and a life safety issue?
Well, like a regular repair would be a faucet dripping. I'm not even sure that a faucet dripping is a violation of the Rental Housing Health Code, but a faucet dripping is a repair, and one would assume that the landlord would want to make sure that the faucet's not dripping because of water bills. But a faucet dripping is a repair that could be made. A life safety issue is there's no water. So if it's a situation where there's no water, the landlord is not going to get paid from this grant if the tenant points that out on their application.
Great. So what other protections are there that go along with this rent money?
So I mentioned already, drop eviction, waive late fees. The payments on this are going to be made at the Vermont Housing Authority's payment standard, which is sort of a understanding of what the fair market rents are in each county, and the landlord will waive any rent that was agreed to in excess of the Vermont State Housing Authority payment standard. Can't go back against the tenant and try and get that later. And the other thing is the landlord will agree to not raise the rent until January 1st, or it could be longer if your lease runs past January 1st.
Great. These are really important protections along with getting the back rent paid. And so just to clarify, Jean, how does this money get paid? Does it come to me as the renter? How does it get distributed?
It all goes to the landlord, direct deposit in the landlord's bank account. That's the only way Vermont State Housing Authority can make a payment, is a direct deposit into a landlord's bank account.
Great. Thank you, Jean. We have a question coming in here, a really good question about who's qualified for this program. So we said earlier, the main thing is that you're behind on rent and you and your landlord agree on how much rent it is. The question is, are people who get Section 8 waivers eligible for this program?
I think they mean Section 8 vouchers. So
Okay.
A housing choice voucher, and some people refer to that as a Section 8, is an agreement where a housing authority pays a portion of the tenant's rent to the landlord, and the tenant pays a portion of their rent to the landlord. And yes, tenants who are behind on their portion can also apply for this money.
Fantastic. That's a great question. Okay. And so we've talked about how the money gets paid, and we've talked about how important it is to talk with your landlord before the application is submitted. So what do you do if you're having a hard time reaching your landlord?
Call Vermont Legal Aid and we will help you. Of course, as much as you know about your landlord and how to contact them and a telephone number and an email address, That'll certainly help, but we will help you get a hold of your landlord, and we will, with you, help you explain why this program will help out the landlord and see if we can get the landlord to agree to it.
Great, thanks, Jean. So what if you and your landlord don't agree on how much rent is overdue?
Well, it's pretty important before submitting applications to have the conversation to figure out how much rent is overdue and how much you're applying to the grant program for. Because if the tenant and the landlord are putting down different amounts, I am not sure exactly what Vermont State Housing Authority is going to do. However, if you both put down the same amount, I'm pretty sure what Vermont State Housing Authority is going to do. They're going to give you the amount that you both agree on as overdue rent.
Great, thank you. So let's see, do we have any other big problems that we anticipate? Are there any other resources for help with people that are having problems with this application or the program?
We anticipate that most people will be able to get the benefit of this program without any help. In other words, going to the Vermont State Housing Authority website, reading the materials, downloading the applications, filling them out, saving them, and then emailing them back. We know that most people will be able to do this on their own. There will be some people who will find the technical part hard, will have questions about what they should put in different blanks, will have need help because of needing to be able to hold a paper application in their hands, or need help with translation. So anybody who has any sort of question or problem can call Vermont Legal Aid, and we will try to help you get over that particular problem. If it's not a thing that we can exactly do, we will do our best to hook you up with somebody who can help those things. But Vermont Legal Aid has interpretation services available. We are there and ready to walk people through the application if they want. It is not going to be that Vermont Legal Aid is going to email in people's application for them. People need to email in their own applications, but trying to figure out where to go or how to do that, we will walk through that with you.
Great. Thank you, Jean. So we have a question coming in here, a really great question. This individual says, I understand that both the tenant and the landlord have to complete applications in order for the payment to be made. But will the process be triggered if one or the other completes an application first? So what if the tenant or the renter completes an application and sends it to the Vermont State Housing Authority, but there's not a landlord application waiting?
So if a tenant sends an application and there is no landlord application, once Vermont State Housing Authority looks through their database and ascertains that, they will, we're not quite sure the process, what they're going to do, but they will contact the tenant and say, hey, where's the landlord's application? And they will also ask the tenant if they want to be referred to Vermont Legal Aid, so Vermont Legal Aid can help find the landlord and get them on board with the application.
Great. And so what if the landlord submits the application first, and as a tenant, you haven't gotten yours in yet?
Well, Vermont State Housing Authority will hold a single application and wait till one comes in to match it. However, they do feel like if an application comes in, they need to respond to it, decide yes or no in 10 days. So if a landlord applies and the tenant hasn't applied yet, Vermont State Housing Authority will call the landlord and say, hey, get the tenant's application in. There's a kind of landlord application where the landlord has said, I've tried to get a hold of the tenant. They're not responding to me, so I'm going to apply without them. If the tenant doesn't respond within the 10 days after they get notified that the landlord has made an application, then the Vermont State Housing Authority could go ahead and pay the landlord half the rent that's due, and the landlord would still have the right to evict. So if a tenant gets notified that the landlord has submitted an application, it is really in the tenant's best interest to submit an application to get their whole rent paid up so that they can stay in their apartment.
Jean. And so are there any other, when the application from the tenant and the landlord are being matched, are they doing that based on the name or a bunch of things? How do you, I guess would you talk to your landlord to figure out exactly how to write down the landlord's business or what name to put?
That is a really good thing to do. Like, for instance, some tenants think of their landlord as by their landlord's name, but their landlord may have a business name for running the building. It would be better to put down the landlord's business name. We think Vermont State Housing Authority is matching tenants and landlords together by name at this point. It's also pretty important to put down your exact address correctly, because Vermont State Housing Authority could match landlords and tenants by address. So that would mean street address and apartment number, exactly as, you know, if those match, that's probably a good idea of what matches.
Got it. Okay, thank you, Jean. We have a really wonderful question here. It's the person says, I keep hearing about all this as if my landlord is an individual. My landlord is a housing trust. So can I still participate in this program if my landlord is not just, you know, one individual person, but it's an entire housing trust?
Yes. If you're one way to tell is if you have a written rental agreement, the landlord is the person whose name is on the written rental agreement, whether that's a company or an LLC or a housing trust. That is who you rent from, and you need to contact your contact person for your landlord and ask them to fill out the landlord application.
Got it. So you could do this even if, for example, I guess I don't know if Vermont State Housing Authority are landlords themselves or if they have rental places, but even if it was like a big company or big organization, you can still participate in this program. It's not just for sort of a mom and pop landlord situation.
Oh no. So like if you rent from Champlain Housing Trust, you contact your property manager at Champlain Housing Trust and say, will you please fill out the landlord application so we can get caught up on the rent? Yep.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jean. And I think you mentioned this before, but can you apply multiple times for this program, you know, now and then in the future if you're still behind?
Yes. So I think the best advice is to get caught up now. And if you get behind again in the future, you can apply again. This program will run till December or until the money runs out. And one of the things that we're doing is we're going back to the legislature in August. We're going to show that a lot of Vermonters need this program. They may put some more money in because the object of the program is to prevent eviction. It is to keep people housed. There is a public health crisis going on, and people need to stay where they are, or at least at this point in time, it is not a good idea to force people to leave their homes because of non-payment of rent. So this is an important program, and we want everybody who is at risk of eviction to get their rent caught up so that they're not at risk of eviction anymore and they can stay in their homes during the pandemic.
Thank you, Jean. And I think you talked about this during, well, I had some tech difficulties here, but is there any kind of, if you end up having to apply for this program a second time, you know, you get caught up this time, but then you're still not necessarily able to continue paying, is there, do you have to prove when you're putting the application in that this is a one-time thing, or you said it's okay to apply multiple times?
No, it's just when you apply, how much do I owe on rent right now? And then that rent will get caught up, and you can apply again saying, how much do I owe on rent right now? And again, people who are filling out the applications are promising that the information that they are giving is true. So if you, if your rent is $900 and you owe 2 months rent, so that's $1,800, and you come back in later and say, I owe $600. I don't know that Vermont State Housing Authority is going to match that up, but it is better to get to always give accurate information about what your rent is and how much is in arrear, and you and your landlord agree on that. And remember, I think I didn't explain really well what the Vermont State Housing Authority payment standard is.
Right, because this won't pay if you have, say you're an individual in a 1-bedroom and it's a $3,000 monthly rent. This isn't just going to pay anything that your landlord has as your rent. If there's a limit on it.
Yes.
Are you on the hook for the rest, what the program doesn't pay?
You are not on the hook for the rest. So if you have an expensive apartment, let's say a $2,000 1-bedroom, even in Chittenden County, that is more than the Vermont State Housing Authority payment standard for Chittenden County for a 1-bedroom. So you would not get the program would not pay your landlord $2,000, but would pay your landlord for whatever the Vermont State Housing Authority payment standard is, which I'm just going to take a guess, it's something like $1,200, maybe. Mm-hmm. So for the months that your landlord agrees to accept the back rent for, your landlord is also agreeing to waive. In other words, take it off the books. It's no longer owed by the tenant, so that the landlord can get the majority of the rent through the program and waive the rest. So once you're caught up, your $2,000 rent stays $2,000. You are obliged to pay that in the future. If you get behind again and the landlord accepts the rent program again, then waives that excess and you don't owe that.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jean. So now if you have any individual questions about your own situation or other kinds of situations that you're wondering about that we haven't covered yet, that was the close of the general information, and we're glad to answer any specific questions. I do notice that we have several people that are calling in over the phone, which is fantastic. There's not a way for you to ask questions over the phone during the webinar and during this town hall, but you can, of course, give Vermont Legal Aid and Legal Services of Vermont a call afterwards if you don't find an answer during this. If you have any questions, you can type them into the Facebook Live comment section, or you can put them into the Zoom Q&A box here on Zoom. Let's see if there's any other questions that we had coming up. So Jean, what if you owe money to a landlord that you don't still live in their apartment? So maybe you moved in June, you had to move during the pandemic, but you still owe some money to the previous landlord. Is this a program that can help you in that situation?
No, this is because the objective of the program is to pay rent so people can stay where they are. It's not a debt relief program in that way. It is a maintain your current housing program. So you may owe a debt to your former landlord, but this program will not pay that debt to your former landlord. Great.
Thank you, Jean. So let's see, any other things here? Do I have to print out the application and sign my signature and then scan it back in, or can I sign it over the computer?
You can sign it over the computer. So if you download the PDF fillable form, you fill it in, including typing in your signature, you save it on whatever device you have, and then you email it from there. That's the way you're supposed to do it. Saving it on your device, you will have a copy of your completed application, and that's a good idea.
Perfect. Thank you, Jean. And I think maybe you mentioned this, but how do you find out whether or not your application's been accepted?
You will get a return email. So if you have emailed successfully, you'll get a confirming email. We got your application. And then it will be 10 days, which means 2 weeks. And then you should be getting an email saying what the decision was of Vermont State Housing Authority, that they are going to give you the grant and send it to your landlord. And I'm not sure all the contents of that email makes sense to me, that it might have a date in it, that the payment is going to be made, but I'm not exactly sure. We're brand new. We don't know exactly how this is going to go. So.
Got it. So we know that they have 10 days to start to finish processing the applications. So at this point, it hasn't even been 10 days, so we don't know what the final result looks like.
Yeah.
Great. Are the forms available in any languages other than English?
Forms are not available in anything else than English. So if a person's main language is something other than English, they can call Vermont Legal Aid. They can actually call Vermont State Housing Authority and get an interpreter to walk them through it and fill it in and submit it that way.
Wonderful. And so Vermont State Housing Authority, if you do need help with an interpreter for language assistance, the number is 802-828-3295. Wonderful.
Or a tenant can call Vermont Legal Aid, and we can do that too.
Great. Perfect. Thank you so much, Jean. let me see if there's any other questions coming in.
Should we say something about resources for homeless people?
Yeah, great. So we've been talking a lot about what happens if you ask for help with your current landlord to prevent eviction, prevent homelessness. So what if you currently are unhoused?
We think that what should happen is you should call your local community agency, which is a coordinated entry site. If you are currently homeless, and I believe pretty low income, you go to a coordinated entry site and they will take an application. They are also able to offer first security, advance rent, and some rent payments. Plus, they are up to low income people able to offer some other things that folks might need, like back utility payments and working with a worker to remove barriers to getting into permanent housing. So I think people who are currently homeless should start at their local community agency coordinated entry site. You figure out which place you should go by calling 211 and telling 211 where you are, and they can tell you which agency to contact. People who are homeless or were housed in motels with general assistance money since the shutdown are also eligible to get first and security from this program, from this back rent program, much like the unaffordable tenancy people are. But folks who were homeless and housed under GA housing should start with their local coordinated entry site first.
Great, thank you, Jean. We do have a couple more questions here. So what if the renter or tenant doesn't have a computer and an email address? Can another service agency submit the application on their behalf?
That's interesting. And it just shows how much we've been using computers lately that it didn't cross my mind that somebody might not have an email address, but I guess that's possible that somebody might not have an email address. Mm-hmm. People can submit applications in paper in the mail. So that what would happen then is you get a community agency to help you print out the application, you fill it out in handwriting, and you mail it to Vermont State Housing Authority. I think that would be the best way of assuring that it's coming from you. And yeah,
Got it.
That's the way to do it.
So we have our suggestion is the best way will be perhaps to use the paper application, but we don't know for sure whether it's okay for another agency to submit it on behalf of a tenant. We just don't quite know it.
Right,
yet.
I don't.
Yeah. Yes, and someone's commenting here. We have a message coming in that's very true. It's very important to be prepared for people that don't have computer access, given that many libraries are not open to free computer use right now, which a lot of folks rely on for these kinds of programs. So that's important. Thank you. Okay, another question here. So let's say that you're checking the box for unsustainable or unaffordable, and you have a landlord that you are looking for help paying the first month's rent and security deposit. Does that application have to be with the same landlord that you're currently living with, or that you're currently renting from? Or can you use this to switch landlords and have perhaps one application that pays for the back rent with one landlord and a different application that pays for the security deposit with the new landlord?
Yes, exactly that last thing that you said. So you owe your current landlord some back rent and you're still living there, but you have found a new landlord who is willing to rent to you 45 days from now, but you need security deposit, first month's rent to move in. So you would have two landlords making an application, one where you're currently living and one where you're going to be able to move in 45 days from now. And so yes, you need both landlords to fill in an application.
Great, and so you could get, two different landlords could get this assistance so that you're able to continue being housed safely.
Right, because yes, if a landlord accepts security deposit, first month's rent for a future move-in date, that landlord is obligated to provide you with an apartment. Yeah, that could be a complication, in which case if somebody finds themselves in that situation where they can't move in, where they thought they were going to move in, call Vermont Legal Aid and we'll help you figure it out. Normally, Vermont Legal Aid would have, one of the first questions we ask is what your income is. And for this program, Vermont Legal Aid does not have any income limits. We want to answer questions from tenants. We will likely refer questions from landlords to the Vermont Landlords Association, who also, Vermont Landlords Association will answer questions whether people are members of the Vermont Landlords Association or not.
Great. So this program is like the other Vermont Legal Aid program, the Office of a Healthcare Advocate, where I work, which is, it's for anyone. So anyone who lives in Vermont, the Healthcare Advocate works on anyone in Vermont with with healthcare problems. And this is anyone in Vermont with problems with this program. There's no income limits. There's no need to prove anything. It's just you're behind on rent.
Right.
Great. That's fantastic. Thank you, Jean. So the place to go to get more information about this is the Vermont State Housing Authority website. The vsha.org is where the application and some information is. There's also vtlawhelp.org. And of course, if you can't find answers there, you can call us. One really fantastic question came in here. So what if a tenant doesn't have a written rental agreement? Can they still get in this program?
Oh yes, because in Vermont, rental agreements can be written or oral. I mentioned at the beginning that I'm a renter. I have lived in my apartment for 15 years and I have never had a written lease because the landlord-tenant law in Vermont really spells out all the rights and duties of both landlords and tenants. And so my landlord, who's also a lawyer, and I rely on the Residential Rental Agreements Act, and we don't have any written lease at all. So non-written rental agreements are valid rental agreements in Vermont. And you are eligible for this program even if you don't have a written lease.
Wonderful. That was a great question. Thank you. Let's see. Any other questions that folks have, things you can think of? I know this program is so new. We may not have run into all the questions folks may have yet. We're still unfolding as folks take a look at the application, start filling it out. Jean, as you start hearing from people sort of what the FAQs are that you're getting, we can kind of see what things are happening here.
Yeah, we also don't have all the answers. The program is so new. So asking a question now may make us go seek an answer for something that hasn't quite been hammered out. I guess one of the things I want to say is that this program, it isn't everything to everyone, but the kind of constraints we were working with, the money for this program came from the federal coronavirus relief fund money that Vermont got. And that particular federal money came with the restriction that it all needed to be spent by December. And so often a program to help people takes 6 months to figure out all the questions and all the answers and how things are going to work. We did not have 6 months to figure this out. We had 3 weeks. So that we put everything that we thought should go in the program, and then this bill only got signed into law on July 2nd. So Vermont State Housing Authority, they knew it was coming, but they had been working very hard to put things together so that the money is available to people. That seems to be more important than perfect forms and perfect materials. I believe the forms and materials do express the basic ideas of the program, but there are obviously going to be questions that come up. But the reason it's like that was to make sure that the money was out there to help Vermonters, to help them stay in their homes now.
Great. And I think, Jean, you touched on an important point there, which is that the application's really fast and really easy. You have all this information, which is how much you owe, your landlord's name. It's 2 pages or less. It's a short application, unlike some of those health insurance applications or food assistance applications that have many, many, many layers of questions and documentation. This is really intended to keep people housed quickly and simply and get that money out the door so it can help Vermonters right away. So this is actually a pretty big distinction, and it's one of the great benefits of the program is that it should be hopefully fast.
One of the things we realized as we worked first for the eviction moratorium and then for this program in the legislature is during a pandemic like this, housing is healthcare. And one of the things about healthcare, and Amelia probably could go on about this for a while, is that we all want everyone to have it, because you having housing, you having healthcare helps keep me housed and safe and healthy too. So that's really the reason for this program. We knew that some people would have a hard time paying the rent in regular times. Some people have a hard time paying the rent. And the idea is this is to get rent paid so people can stay housed, because that's the way we all stay healthy.
Jean, you brought up something important too. What if someone is behind on rent, but there's not a pandemic reason? They're just behind on rent for any number of other reasons. Does it have to be a pandemic reason you're behind on rent to qualify?
No.
Okay, so this helps really anyone behind on rent for any reason.
Right. I guess the way we think about it is if you're behind on rent, you're at risk of eviction. And since Vermont has, they want to keep everyone housed, everyone who is behind on rent is eligible for this program.
Great. So by being behind on rent, by being at risk of eviction, it is a pandemic problem in and of itself, no matter whether you lost your job because of the pandemic and you can't afford it, or something else is going on that's completely unrelated.
Right. Even if you're already in court, even if there's already been a court case filed, particularly if there's already been a court case filed, please call Vermont Legal Aid and say, there's a court case filed for non-payment of rent. How can I get out of this court case?
Mm-hmm.
Figure that out.
Great. So this program could be a tool to stop evictions that are currently trying to happen and keep people housed, even when there's a legal process already going on.
Right. So the legal process, let me talk about how the moratorium relates to this a little bit. The moratorium means that the courts cannot move, the court itself cannot move forward on scheduling an eviction case. But if the landlord and tenant agree to take this money, then they can file a paper in court saying the court case is dropped. That didn't require the court to move the case forward. The parties could make and for court, it has to be a written agreement. They can make a written agreement telling the court, drop the case if they resolve it with the receipt of this money. So things that are currently on the docket and pending and waiting for the court to open again could be ended, could be resolved, could be settled if landlords and tenants in those cases apply for this money, get this money, and the reason for eviction.
Right. So Jean, what you're saying is that the moratorium means that the court can't move forward by itself with any of these eviction cases that aren't an urgent emergency. But that doesn't mean that new evictions can't be filed by a landlord. There can't be new evictions sort of that the landlord tries to start the process on. And this is why this is an important protection. And it also means that this kind of program or other kinds of negotiations can drop a case because it's not automatically erasing any cases with the moratorium. They're just paused.
No, I mean, they would have, if there's a court case filed, the court case will sit there until the courts reopen unless the parties put in writing that they agree to end the court case.
Right, so that eviction case could be sitting there waiting for you when the emergency declaration is over. But if you use a program like this, this could help get rid of it.
Right.
Great. Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions coming in here, so it sounds like we've answered everything, which is fantastic. And we hope that folks will do this application, give us a call if you run into any problems, check out our website for some more information, and we really appreciate you spreading the word about this program. Thank you so much for helping keep Vermonters housed.
Thank you.